Hey guys! Today we're going to combine arrays and objects to model real-world data like lists of users, books, or products. This is one of the most common things you'll see in JavaScript projects. So let's break it down step by step. Why combine arrays and objects? An array holds multiple items. An object holds detailed info about one item. Put them together and you've got a list of detailed items. So let's create our first array of objects. So we declare a variable, users, and then we assign it between square brackets, an array. And then inside the array, we want to add a few objects. So remember, this is how we add objects. So the first key we want is name, and let's give it a value, Sarah, and then comma separated. The second key we want is age, and the value 22. Then here at the end, also comma separated so that we can add the second object. So let's just copy this, paste it here, and then just change the values. So that's James, age 30, then comma, and then here the last one, say Lena, and then 27. You do not need to add a comma here at the end. Okay, so what do we have here? Again, we have declared a variable, users. We assigned it an array. So think of this array as the main container. Inside the container, you have objects. This is the first object. This is the second object. This is the third object. So again, this is the container, or just imagine a big box. When you open the box, you have a number of objects, and you can add as many objects as you want. Now each object again here is made of different properties. So we have the first one, a key called name, which has a value Sarah, comma separated, then another item in the object, which is a key called age, and a value 22. So let's console log users now. Okay, so as you can see, we have here the array and the three objects that we have added. So in our example here, each object in the array represents a single user. The first user is Sarah, the second user is James, and the third user is Lena. So this is how apps store lists of people, items, or anything else for that matter. Now let's see how to access individual items and properties within the array. So let's say we want to access the user Sarah. How do we do that? So we console log, and then we get the array users, and then without dot notation here, you just want the square brackets. So we're trying to target the first item in the list, or the first object, which is this one. And remember from our arrays lesson, so we start, this is an array, this is just like any other array. And here, the first one is at index 0. The second one is at index 1. And the third one is at index 2. So if we are trying to target this one, what do we need to add here is 0. So when we add 0, we get now this object, which is basically the first user in the users array or in the users list, Sarah, age 22. That's the first object. Now, what if we want to actually just console log the name? We don't want the whole object. We're just after the name. So how do we do that? So let's again copy this one. Now here, while we are here, this is returning the entire object. But using dot notation, now we can say, I'm actually only interested in name. So we just go like this, dot name. And now what we see here is we have Sarah in the console. So let's do the same thing, but this time get the age. So console log. So again, here we are accessing specific items and properties regarding the first object, which is the user Sarah. And now in this case, we just want the age. And we see here 22. So let's try to access now the age of the second user, James. So what we're after basically is the second item in the array. So how do we do that? So we console log users, but where is James at the moment? It's not 0 because remember in our array lessons, again, we have 0, 1, and 2. So if we wanted to target this specific object, we have to access it by entering 1 here. Okay, so 1, that now we have access to this user object, James. And then we are after the value 30. So how do we get this value? Well, we need the key. What is the key? Age. Remember the key value pair. So this is a key value pair here. Okay, and when we put .age, we're gonna get 30 in the console. So again, if we do 1, this gives us the entire object, name James, age 30. But we're just after this value here, 30, so we need to target the key. Okay, so using dot notation, we put dot and then age, and now we have access to the age value for this object, which is 30. So just like arrays, you use an index to grab a specific object, then use dot notation to access a property inside that object. Okay, so let's see now how we can loop through an array of objects. And if you need a refresher on loops, just go and watch the loops episode in this JavaScript series. So here we want to use a for off loop. So let's start by saying for, open parentheses, and then let user of the array users, and then between curly brackets, we want a console log. And then what do we want here? We want the user dot name. So we're now accessing the name on the user object, then concatenate, and then a bit of space here is, then a bit of space here, then concatenate again. Then we want the user age, okay, then concatenate, then a bit of space, and then years old. So now, as you can see here in the console, we have Sarah is 22 years old, James is 30 years old, and Lina is 27 years old. So you can loop through and work with each item or object one at a time. Now let's try to update a property in one of the objects. So say that we want to target this object, James, and we want to change the age value from 30 to 31. So how do we do that? Okay, so first what we need is the users array, and then we want to access the user James, which is, if you remember, at index 1. So we insert 1 here, which is the index. So basically here what we're saying, go to the users array and fetch me the item or the object in the location index 1. And that's why we get here the object. This is the object, James, age 30. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to target age, which at the moment is 30, but we want to assign it a new value, which is 31. So again, when we console log users 1, we will get now the object again, named James, but this time age is 31. It has been updated to 31 from 30. So you can change values inside any object by using its index and property name. Okay, now let's see how we can add a new object to the array, but first let's tidy things up a bit here. So let's comment these out so we can clear the console a bit. Okay. We don't need those anymore. We can also, okay, so we need users. We still need users. We're gonna be targeting that. So remember in our arrays methods episode in this playlist, we used the .push method to add an item to an array. So here we're gonna use the push method also, but the item this time is going to be an object. So we're gonna push an object to the users array. Okay, so again, now if we console log users, so we console log the users array. So right now we have 3 objects. We have Sarah, James, and Lena, or 3 users. So again, we're going to use the push method now to push an entire object, an entire user into the users array. So we start by targeting the users array, then using the push method, we're going to push what we actually want to push. Well, we want to push an object, okay? So it's going to be an object pretty much like this. So we can just copy that or copy the items inside of it, okay? But we don't want to push Sarah, age 22, because we already have that in the array of objects. So instead, we want to push a new user. So let's do that. Peter, age 24. So now that we have pushed it, let's console log users and see it updated. So now, as you can see, we have Peter here. So this object, Peter, has now been added to the users array of objects. So we ended up with an additional user to the previous users array. So again, we used the push method to push a full object this time into the users array of objects. Okay, now let's clear the console and move to the last item on the list in this episode, which is the practice exercise. And what I would like you to do is to, 1, create an array called books with at least 3 objects. Each book should have a title, author, and pages. Then loop through the array and log title by author has pages. So the title by the author has so many pages. Then add a new book to the list. So pause the video now, have a go at it, and come back for the solution. Okay, so here's an example of a solution. So to save some time, I declared a variable called books and assigned it an array of objects. So again, each one of those is a book, an object, which in this case basically refers to a book. And each book has a number of properties. It's got a title, an author, and pages. Okay, then what we want to do now is we want to create a for of loop. So for let book of books, okay, and then open curly brackets, and then here we want to console log. What do we need? We need the book title, then concatenate, and then a bit of space by, then concatenate again. Then we want the book author, then concatenate, and a bit of space, has, then concatenate the book dot pages, then concatenate, and then a bit of space here, pages. Okay, so let's see again what's happening here. So in the first loop, we are asking for the title of the book. Remember here, book is this object here. So in the first loop, we're accessing this object. So this is a book. So if we want the title 1984, then we need the book in the first loop, and then using the title key, we access 1984. So this is why we have book title, which basically corresponds to here, 1984. Then concatenate by what we need here, book author. So again, we're still in the first loop, and we want now the author. This is the author here, author George Orwell. So book.author is going to access the value on the key author in the first loop. Okay, that's George Orwell. And same thing for pages. So this is just a string, has concatenate book.pages. Now it's going to access this value here, 328. This is why we see here in the console, in the first loop, we see 1984 by George Orwell. George Orwell has 328 pages, 328. So now we finished the first loop. Then now we move to the second loop. The second loop is going to look at index 1. So we started at index 0, then 1, then 2. So in the second loop, now we are here. So we're looking at this object, at this book. And again, we go through the same thing again. And now it's going to print Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari has 443 pages. Again, so we're accessing those values of the book that is located at the moment in the second index of the loop. So 0, 1. So the first index is 0, the second index is 1. And finally, the last object is at index 2 of the books array. This is why we see here The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho has 208 pages. So we're accessing the values of this book, of this object. Okay, so now let's add a new book to the list. So we want to push a book or an object to the end of the array. And how we do that again? We do it using the push method. So we start targeting the books array, then we want the push method, open parentheses, and then here we are adding an object. So we need the title. In fact, we can just copy these here because that's really what we're pushing here. We just want to change the values. Okay, so let's have a new book. So call it Atomic Habits, and the author is James Clear. James Clear, and let's say 320 pages. Okay, so now the book has been added to the array of objects or the array of books. So let's console log books to see it updated. So we've got the array of objects. Can't see it clearly, but this is the beginning of the array and this is the end of the array. And inside the array, we've got a number of objects, a number of books. This is the first one. This is the second one. This is the third one. And this is the last one, which we just added. So that's it for this episode, guys. Well done. Now you know how to work with arrays of objects, which is how real apps and websites handle most of their data. In the next episode, we'll explore how to make decisions based on user input using the prompt method, so your code can respond to what users type. If you enjoyed this episode, hit like and subscribe and keep practicing. You're building real skills. See you in the next one.